Okay, welcome to week 7. Yeah, so this is take 2 of the lecture. Apparently, earlier my microphone wasn't working, so this is the second time I'm recording it. So this week we're talking about promoting learner motivation. So it's basically a lot of overview of what we've already talked about, but it just gives them some strategies for how to actually kind of initiate the motivation process in the classroom. Before we get started, I just wanted to give you some comments on the reading quizzes. So a few things I noticed. So the first thing, self-determination theory. And the question asking you what that was, I noticed a lot of you saying like it's basically just talking about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So it's not quite right. Self-determination theory actually focuses on, so it doesn't really say there's a dichotomy between the two. It says the two are on a continuum. Okay, so they're not really exclusive of each other, but they kind of lead into one another. Okay, so the idea here is that things start off extrinsic, but then they move and become more gradually more intrinsic. Okay, and that's through different regulation strategies that the learner uses. Okay, so we have the 4 different types of regulation that we talk about in that theory, and then so that's kind of how it moves along that continuum. Okay, another thing, so changes in the integrative motivation theory when the cognitive situated period started. So the main thing there is, prior to the cognitive period, we had just the integrated motivation theory, which is basically just saying like learners are motivated based on their environment. Okay, and the problem with that was that you couldn't really do much with it. Okay, so we couldn't really change the student's background in order to get them more motivated. So it wasn't really useful for practitioners, and so the cognitive situated period made it so that we actually took into account these other cognitive theories and we incorporated them into this integrative model. So this is where we see like self-efficacy theory and goal-oriented theory and attribution theory. Like all of those are kind of brought into this new model. Okay, self-determination theory is also brought in there. So that's the main change there. And so that goes into the weaknesses of the integrative motivation theory. So when we talk about the weaknesses, there are several. So the first of all, on its own, prior to that, yeah, so it wasn't really practical. That's not the case anymore. But the main weaknesses now are just that not everybody is in a situation where they can actually have ready access to an L2 community like they do in French-speaking Canada. So that's one weakness. So the theory doesn't actually take that into account very well. The other weakness is that, so in the case of languages like English, which has become globalized, the target of integration is not clear. So we're not really sure what the target L2 community is that the person is trying to become a part of or is interested in. It's hard to tell how that integrated motivation is actually functioning in those instances. And then the final thing is linguistic self-confidence. So a lot of you were like answering the question saying like what promotes or helps linguistic self-confidence, mentioning like the quantity and the quality of the interactions with the L2 or the speakers of the person's L2, and that's good. But the question was really just asking you, so what is it exactly? And so basically, you just have to say, so linguistic self-confidence is how capable the person feels they are. So we're looking back at self-efficacy theory essentially. So how good do you think you are, and how confident are you about that skill? And then something else that I noticed, so people were they kind of didn't answer all of the questions. So make sure when you do the next quiz that you read through the question carefully to know what you need to answer. So I know like for the linguistic self-confidence one, people would often describe what it was and then not actually answer the part about how it's related to Poppy's model of motivation. So we're talking with Poppy, he looks at anxiety in his model. So linguistic self-confidence is directly related to that anxiety. And so I needed you to talk about that, and a lot of you didn't because you only answered the first half of the question. So for this next quiz, just make sure you're reading the full question and answering the whole thing. I want to see you losing points just because you only answered half of the question. The next quiz is actually shorter too, so that should make it more manageable as well. Another thing I want to do before we move on, so a reminder. So you'll recall that back in January, I think it was like week 3, I instituted this policy, and I considered actually enforcing it this week, but I noticed that that was a little bit too, with this past grading cycle. So I noticed that it was going to be punishing a little bit too many people. So just a reminder this time, and to let you know that from now on, this is the case. So the individual discussion posts, so your personal answers to those questions, those are due on Thursday at 11:59 p.m. Okay? Your responses to your classmates are due Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So if you turn in your initial response late, you are going to automatically lose 50% of your discussion post grade for that week. So make sure you're turning it in on time. So that 50% can be a big hit, especially since these discussion posts are worth 35% of your grade. Okay, so make sure you're doing that on time. Okay, so the purpose for that is so that everybody has posted their initial responses, and so that when you go to respond to your classmates, everybody's original responses there, so people have a responses to pick from when they're responding. Okay. Okay, so going into the main the main content for this week. So this reading actually, so as I said, it kind of reviews a lot of the theory, and so we're not really going to focus a lot on that part. We're going to look at more just the strategies. So this lecture isn't going to be as long as the other ones. And so the main thing that we want to start with here is, so Dornier actually mentions expectancy value theory, and so he wants to start with that. And so what we have here is we want to start with looking at the values. So values are actually kind of tricky when it comes to kind of helping to initiate that motivation in the classroom. So the problem is that values are a consequence of the upbringing that you have in your past experiences. So as a teacher, you can't really change that all that much. So it's kind of like ingrained in the student. And it's not something that can be transmitted either. So as a teacher, you can't say, well, this has to be your value because I say so. So the learner actually has to develop that value on their own. Otherwise, they won't actually be motivated, or they won't actually see the purpose for doing the activity. So what you have to do is you have to socialize the values. So they can be socialized, and that's through a variety of different methods that we'll talk about in a second. And so when we talk about values, we actually break them down along the 3 dimensions. So the names for these dimensions should be very familiar. So we have the integrative dimension, the instrumental dimension, and the intrinsic dimension. Okay. We'll talk more about each in a second. So when we talk about socializing values, we have a lot of different methods that we can use. Okay, so we can actually expose people to respected models, so people that are successful in that area. We can persuade them, so we can communicate the reason for doing activities and stuff with them. We can persuade them to see the importance of them. And we can have them participate in what we call powerful learning experiences, so where they have a say in their learning experiences. So they have some sort of sense of knowing that, or they're actually seeing the value because they were a part of that. And so when we look at these, actually the most effective is the modeling, with the other 2 being helpful, but they're not necessarily going to be very strong forces in driving a change in a person's value system. So when we look at modeling, we have 2 here for how to model good behavior. So or how to model in a way to change a student's values. So the first is to have the teacher actually model as a model. So so the teacher can actually be a really good model because they show enthusiasm and commitment in what they're doing. So hopefully they are anyway. So this is why it's important that even as a teacher, like even when you are teaching things that you're not exactly enthusiastic about or aren't all that exciting to you, you still have to kind of put on your game face kind of and act like they are. Because students will pick up on that. They need to see that you're excited in what you're doing, that you see value in it personally for yourself and for them, or they won't see the or they definitely won't develop a sense of value or a sense of like knowing the value of that task. Okay, um, so there are going to be, as a teacher, so many of you are going to go on to teach. As a teacher, you're going to have times when you're not really excited to be teaching what you're teaching. I mean, it happens to me when I'm teaching ESL sometimes, and I have to go over coordinative versus subordinate conjunctions. It's not really all that exciting to teach, but it's something that's necessary, and so they have to see that value to it. Okay, and then something that's important to consider, though, is that teachers are a little bit too different from students. So while teachers can serve as a model for their students, while they can actually help to instill those values in their students, they're a little bit too high up socially for the in the power relationship for the students to really fully for them to have like the fullest impact possible on the students. Okay, so this is where it's good to have not only the teachers but also have like near peer role models. So these are people who are near or close to the students in age, and who maybe are just like one or two levels above that person. So an example of this might be having, for instance, Chinese 200 level students who are in a class and having them have their near peers of like Chinese 400 level students come in and demonstrate their abilities. So by doing that, you kind of allow them to see like it is possible to be successful in this area. And so they can kind of have a better idea of seeing what a successful person looks like, and they can see kind of the utility behind that. They can kind of, so they can see the utility and kind of like the enjoyment that you can get out of it firsthand. Okay, so that can actually be a very good way of changing their values. So then if we look at the different types of value, so we have intrinsic value for one thing. So the idea of like whetting the students' appetites for learning this new type of knowledge. And so we have a number of strategies for that, for invoking that. So this is actually probably the hardest one to change in a student. But I mean, you can try these different things as a way of doing it. So the first one, you can point out challenging or exotic or satisfying aspects of the L2 learning. So a lot of times students do, whether they will let onto it or not, they do like a challenge. And so if it's something's challenging, think about this in terms of goal theory. So, or goal setting theory. You want to have a very specific and a challenging goal in order to set the students up to succeed. Okay, so the more challenging the goal, the more likely they are to be motivated. Okay, so you want to point out that it's challenging aspects. You also want to point out what's new about it or exotic. Okay, so a lot of times what will really influence or impact this intrinsic value that is placed in the task is whether or not it's novel. So so you can probably think of several examples of your own time when you've started something completely new and you're really excited about it. And you know how that excitement wears off, but like at the very beginning, when it's completely new and there's nothing that you know about it yet, you're kind of like eating it all up, kind of. You're really excited to learn it. And so what you need to do is you need to take time out and point out those new aspects constantly to students, so they can draw their attention to that, and that will make it so they're genuinely interested in it. You can also connect to activities that students already like. So like in the classroom or outside of the classroom, you can show how learning a language is actually going to be useful in those areas. And then you can point out a variety of activities available. So as a teacher, you can actually bring in a variety of activities for students to do to practice their language. And so that's going to be a good way to promote this intrinsic value, because if you do the same thing all the time, it's going to lose they're going to lose interest. So you want to have a variety. And then you also want to demonstrate enjoyable tasks. So as a teacher, you want to demonstrate how you enjoy doing this and whatnot, and how it's related to the L2. And then so if we look beyond that to the integrated value, so this is slightly easier to change in students. So first of all, we want to focus on the fact that we want to promote communicative competence. Okay, we want to promote intercultural communicative competence. So we want the students to see the importance of knowing about that other culture in order to communicate with them. Okay, so I mean, we're not talking about having them like integrate like physically or anything like that. We don't necessarily want them to actually integrate with the culture. We want them to metaphorically become interested in it. And so by becoming interested in it, they will be more likely to develop this intercultural communicative competence. Okay. And so some of the ways you can do that. So you can talk about interesting aspects of the L2 culture. And you can show similarities and differences between their cultures and the L2 cultures. And so that's actually really helpful, because a lot of times the similarities are just as important, because students will actually come in a lot of times just assuming that the other culture is just completely different from their own. So when they actually see that there are similarities there, they find it really interesting. And it makes it kind of easier for them to like become a part of that culture too, if they have some similarities already. So we can also, another thing you can do is you can talk about, you have them like brainstorm stereotypes about the culture and then discuss the validity of that. So you can have students sit down and list off the stereotypes that they've heard, and then kind of have people share their experiences with members that they've had with members of that culture, if they have had any. Or your own, you can share your own experiences and have them kind of see, so do these stereotypes hold up? It can be kind of a fun discussion. And then, so the next two are kind of related. So sharing cultural products and then using authentic materials. So, I mean, a lot of times with cultural products, we want to like show them what the culture can do. So we can show movies, we can play music for them, without us. It's like showing them the cultural product doesn't necessarily mean you want them to understand what's going on with it. You just want them to see what that product has produced. Okay. With authentic materials, the focus is actually having them engage with the materials a little bit, so they're actually like practicing the language more. And so this is actually really nice, because this actually kind of relates to integrated and intrinsic value, I think. Because when we have authentic materials, we actually see the person will become more motivated to study the language because they actually see a real life use for it. And so they actually become more interested in it because of that. And because they can actually see, like look at these materials that the people in that culture use, they actually feel like a part of that a little bit more. Okay, so they actually start to value it a little bit more. So these can be things like, you can start this in like the 100 level courses, for instance. Like you could bring in, like I've seen menus just get brought in. And then you could go on in your more advanced level courses, having them read like newspapers or novels or things like that. So if they can actually start doing that, they actually feel like they can be part of that community more. And then, so you can also invite native speakers to class. So they can actually be really nice for having like insights into the culture that nobody else can have. So they can actually explain certain things to the class, and make it so that they get more interested in it and want to be able to like kind of communicate and be a part of that culture a little bit more. And then finally, we have the instrumental value. So looking at, for example, job promotions, you want to get extra money, you want to fulfill a language requirement at a university or high school even, and then you want to improve your social position. So sometimes, like in places like, say, India or the Philippines, being able to speak English is really a great thing. Like it makes you look more important. So these are all things that would be like instrumental value, and that a lot of times students already come with. So in a way, this is actually the simplest way of addressing the value aspect of motivation. So you can actually get an idea of what the student's goals are for learning this language, and then link all the activities to the student's goals. Okay, so you want to make it so that they're motivated to keep going, so that they can see, oh, so I have this goal of, for instance, getting a job promotion. So these activities will help me promote, or will help me to develop my speaking ability, so that I can perform well in these different business contexts, for instance. So you link it to students' goals, and then you encourage them to apply their language skills to real life situations. So you make them consider. So if you're going to the bank, what would you say there? How do you communicate in the language in the bank? Okay, so this kind of helps them to see, so how they're going to use it outside of the classroom. So a lot of times when we take a language class, we go into the classroom, and once we leave, it's done for the day. And so we see a lot of dropout, and that's part of the reason, because people don't actually get the chance to use it outside of that environment. And so actually linking it outside of the classroom helps with that, and it helps to add value to this idea of learning language. So on the other side, we have expectancy. Okay, so we have expectancy value theory. We talked about value, now expectancy. Yeah, so expectancy is completely in the mind of the learner. So how do they expect to succeed or not? And so some of the ways that we can promote expectancy for learners is actually to do some of these different things I have listed here. So we talked about modeling already. So we can have near peer models who show that they are successful. So it allows the student to see that they can be successful. And in a way, models can actually help, linking this to another theory, students to really develop that sense of ideal self. Okay, so their ideal L2 self. If they can actually see somebody else being successful, they are going to have a stronger image of themselves being successful. You can also scaffold and provide preparation. So giving them the proper materials leading up to a certain task, and giving them detailed explanations and everything. So that's going to be really helpful. Allows them to gives them the background that they need to be successful. Give them help when they're doing the work. Group work, so that actually helps people to work together. So it allows them to work together, get feedback from each other. So they're not really just in it on their own, but they're working on it together. Okay, so and as a team effort, they are going to feel that they're going to be more likely to succeed in the end. Okay, so this goes back to the idea of group dynamics again that we talked about before, or cooperative or communicative cooperative group work. And then yeah, so clear criteria, having clear objectives for any activity is going to be useful. So students have to know where they're going and how they're going to get there. If they don't know where they're going, they're not going to feel like they can succeed at the task. Okay, and then the last one, which is really hard to do completely anyway, is to consider and remove obstacles. So as a teacher, you have to think about your students and feel like, okay, so these students, they have problems with this, this, and this, so I have to try to circumnavigate that a little bit, so to prevent that from happening. So I have to give them some sort of a handicap, for instance, to help them deal with that. And so that will be helpful. You can't predict everything, obviously. So, I mean, just have some sort of plan in place for when they encounter a obstacle that you didn't think about, so that you can help them deal with it. Okay, so that helps them to kind of be more confident in themselves in terms of their success. Okay, and then looking at goal-orientedness. So when we think about the idea of expectancy or value, so goals are going to be very important in that. So we want to connect those expectancies and those values to the goals. So a lot of times we have course goals that are different from student goals. So people from the outside are actually imposing these goals on these students. And so students don't really accept or understand the learning activities as a result. Okay, so they're not really sure why they have to do what they're doing. It's because they're not a part of that decision making. And so that's a problem because all the group members have to share the same goal in order for there to be motivation as a group. Um, and so something that helps in this case is to initiate discussions with students about goals in general. So asking them what types of goals might be uh, good types of goals, for instance, or um, having them like think about like the class in general and seeing, so where do they want to be at the end of the class, so how do they want to proceed to that. And so when you do this, you have to kind of take into account individual goals. So what do they personally want to do? What are the institutional constraints? So what does the program require that you do? Okay, so that's important to consider. And then what's the success criteria? So what will a successful completion of the goal look like? Okay, so you have to make sure these are realistic in nature. You have to make sure they're challenging, and they have to be very specific, remember. So the main purpose of this is that if students don't have a goal, they're going to wander aimlessly, so they won't really see the purpose or the value in doing the activity. So by having something to look forward to, they see that purpose. Okay, so yeah, so why goals? It directs attention, regulates the effort people put into the task, like I just said, encourages persistence. So as long as they have that goal to look at, they will keep going, okay, towards it, or hopefully will keep going. I mean, there are other aspects that might come in there and influence their effort and motivation, but for the most part, if they have a goal, it will help them to be persistent. And then it will also promote a search for relevant action plans. So because they know exactly where they have to go, they have a better idea of what types of plans or strategies they can use to reach that final destination. Okay, and so something that helps with this is to have relevant materials. Okay, so as the book says here, so students tell us that they care about learning, but they don't always get what they need. Okay, so I think that's a really important thing to remember. So students want to learn. Even students who say they don't want to learn, they want to learn about something. They want to learn, they're interested in something. And so the problem is that because of these outside influences that are kind of telling us what we have to teach them, it makes it difficult to address everything that they want to learn. And so what we need to do is we kind of need to make it so that the materials are relevant to those students. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but when we talk about goals, we want to have them develop a goal for themselves, and then we want to make sure the materials and the activities that we create are all related to that goal and clearly related to it. So we want to have this so-called red thread permeating the activities that connects the learner to the goal at the end. Okay, so as we go on, we want to make sure that we explicitly explain to learners how these activities all relate to that final goal. So how they will help to reach that final goal. Okay, so a lot of what we do in the classroom is really a lot of what helps is to be explicit and to actually treat the learners like they can actually understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. Okay. Now it's not always easy for teachers to do this. There's a lot of constraints on them. So especially when we talk about like public schools and whatnot, with the Common Core or the old No Child Left Behind, there's not really much leeway for teachers to have. So they have to kind of focus on these different things that learners may not be interested in. And then they also have to prepare them for these tests, these big standardized tests. So, I mean, it's hard to do, but I mean, it helps to do it to an extent. You can't do everything that you want to do, but you can at least try to incorporate a little bit so that the learners can see the purpose, okay? And so some of the things that you can do is you can find out about their interests and hobbies and needs. Okay, so so in terms of needs, so why are they taking this course? Why do they care about studying the language that they're studying? So that kind of helps you to kind of focus lessons around those make activities focused on their needs, their personal needs, and then also looking at their interests and hobbies. So you can actually adjust your topics that you talk about based on their interests and hobbies. And so some of the ways you can do this, pretty easy. You interview them or have discussions one-on-one. group discussions, where they brainstorm with each other and share it as a class. And then you can have them do essays and questionnaires. So these are all, like, basically it kind of comes in the form of conducting a miniature needs analysis for a program. Okay, so you want to know what the students want. And that helps to better adapt the course to them. Okay. It's tricky. So it's something that, yeah. So as a teacher, if you don't have a lot of time, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do this. And basically, as a new teacher, you might have a lot. It might be a lot harder to do than if you've been teaching for like a year, and then you have things already kind of set up, and then you can actually probably take more time to do something like this. But in general, if you can show relevance of materials to the students and how it relates to that goal, it will be motivating in itself. And then something else you can do is you can have students write alternative assignments or materials on topics they're interested in. So this can be really nice, especially in language classes. So something I've done in the past is I've like in a program I've taught, so we had specific grammar points we had to cover. But what I did was I allowed students to actually pick some and teach them to the class themselves. And so they actually could incorporate activities that they like to do. They could introduce topics using the grammar that they were teaching to the class. And then so it kind of not only became their learning, so they not only like took control of it, but they actually tailored it to their needs and made it fit what they wanted it to, while still fitting in the constraints of the program. Okay. So yeah, so we talked about relevance of materials, goals, and how those all kind of help to promote these this expectancy of success and these values. Okay, and the perceived value in the task. Something else that is useful is learning beliefs. And learning beliefs are going to be especially useful when we're talking about promoting expectancy of success. Okay, so a lot of times we have learners come to the classroom, the L2 classroom, with a lot of incorrect beliefs about what language learning is. So a lot of people will come saying, like, or believing that, oh, well, after 1 or 2 years, I can actually be pretty fluent in the language. You have to have, or they'll be like, you have to have a certain aptitude for learning language. I've even seen some will be like, well, women are better than men at learning language. So people come into the classroom with these types of beliefs, and then it's incorrect. So it actually serves to function as kind of a time bomb in a way. So like if you come believing that you have to have a certain aptitude to learn a language, and then you do poorly on your first couple of tests, you're going to really, that your expectancy of success is going to go way down, and you're going to become less motivated. And so it'll become like this vicious cycle that where you'll just keep doing poorer and poorer, and then you'll just give up. The same is true for let's see. Never mind. So I can't. I thought I had an example, but I forgot it. So so then you have to make sure that you correct these beliefs first. Okay. So oh yeah, going back. So another thing. So another time bomb that is really hurtful to people and will actually lead a lot of people to drop out is the belief that 2 years is enough to learn a language. And so when they get to that 2-year mark and they're not fluent, they get really disappointed. And so I think, yeah, so we have to convey that learning a language is an investment and not a chore, for one thing. So you have to put time into it, and it will kind of, so the more we invest in it, the more that we will, more in kind of like capital gains we'll get in the end. Okay. And so something we can do that works really well actually and promotes a lot of discussion is to have students look at this beliefs about language learning inventory that Dornier mentioned. So Horowitz developed this, and it has like a lot of commonly held language learning beliefs and a lot of them aren't necessarily accurate. What's useful is to have students actually fill out the survey and then compare answers with each other, and then kind of talk about them together as a class. you'll find that a lot of students have incorrect beliefs, and you can actually correct or try to correct those beliefs from the start. And so that kind of makes it so you're not setting them up to fail. They can actually come to this with more realistic expectations for themselves. And they can know that. And so, like, for instance, when they get through that second year and they realize that, oh, they're not fluent, but they do have some like this idea of like intercultural communicative competence, that it wasn't all for nothing, and they're going to be more likely to continue from that point on. Okay, so when we talk about goal-oriented theory, it kind of helps us to place more real expectations on ourselves, so we have a higher likelihood of expecting to succeed, and we see a greater purpose in the activity. So, like language learning in this case, learning beliefs will actually help us to promote this idea of expectancy of success. Okay. And so, let's see. So that's about it for now. And so what we'll do for next week, so your assignments are going to be this. So you'll have the reading quiz number 2, which is due on Sunday. Okay. Your project proposal is also due on Sunday. There's no discussion forum this week, just because I thought that the reading quiz and the project proposal was enough. And then you also have to read. So you have Gilmore 2007, and then a group of your classmates will be presenting on Dornier 2002, and then there's also Burnhouse and Gardner. So I ordered that through the library. I'm still waiting for it to get delivered, but once it is, I'll upload it under the resources tab. Okay. So yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully the audio is taking this time, and have a good week.